Hello, I'm Nicola Walton from Daisy and Grace, and I'm excited to share with you a fun project to make with the Daisy and Grace templates, available exclusively in the United States at Missouri Star Quilt Company. Now let's get sewing with Daisy and Grace and Missouri Star Quilt Company. Hello, I'm Nicola from Daisy and Grace, and I'm really excited to show you this amazing bag. It's a zippered square bag. It's using my Daisy and Grace Quilt-As-You-Go templates, and can you believe this bag is made up from lots of little individual quilts, because they're Quilt-As-You-Go quilts in this. We're using a fabulous fabric from Yoda for coriander quilts, and the backing is Bella Solids. We've got another one in Tula Pink fabrics as well, so, to die for, and we're using the great fancy zips from Missouri Star. So I need to show you how these templates work. This is my template, and it comes in two sections. All my templates come in two sections. You have an outer shape and you have an inner shape. From the outer shape, you're going to cut your backing, which also becomes your binding. And from the inner shape, you're going to cut your main fabric and your batting, or your wadding. We know it as wadding, you know it as batting. Tomato, tomato, same thing. But the beauty with the 5-inch square is this 5-inch square fits perfectly on a charm square. Look at that, perfect, no cutting, ready to go. There's also some pre-cut batting as well, so you could be away and have this bag done in a jiff. Now let me show you how Quilt-As-You-Go is done. So from the outer template, you're going to cut your backing and your binding, which I've pre-done because I'm lazy and I don't like cutting when I'm sat down. So I've done that already. Now you're going to place your template on top of your backing, and the magic with my templates is it gives you this recess. Now this recess is a trick because you're going to put your batting in that recess, and look at that, fits perfectly. Then you're going to take your main fabric and put that in there as well. Perfect. And you're going to take a couple of pins and pin that in place. And once that's pinned in place, you can remove your outer template. So I'm going to pop my template aside because now I've finished with that for a second. Next, I'm going to show you how to create the bindings on your mini quilt. So what you're going to do is take your backing fabric and you're going to do one fold so that it meets the edge of your fabric and your batting, like that, so that the raw edge of that fabric runs up along the raw edge of your main fabric and your batting. And I'm just going to use my fingers to press that in place. The next thing we're going to do is roll it over, and this will conceal that raw edge, and that creates your first piece of binding. So look how easy that is. I'm going to fold that over, and then I'm going to take some pins, because on this one I'm going to use the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch this by machine. If I was going to do it by hand, I would use clips to clip it. And that is one of the beauties of my Quilt-As-You-Go templates. You don't have to just sew it by machine. You can sew it by hand, or you could do a mixture of both, whatever you feel appropriate. And what I'm going to do, I'm turning that over and I'm going to do the other side, exactly the same process. So I'm going to turn that over, match it so that that raw edge matches the edge of the batting. I'm totally confused, but you know what I mean. It's batting and the main fabric, and then we're going to turn it over once more and pin it in place. And I'll try not to stab myself. These pins are super sharp, they're super great, and you know what the best thing is? You can iron over them. Hallelujah. It's great. So I'm going to take that to the ironing board, and gently I'm just going to press over those edges, and see, I can press straight over those pins And that gives me a line that's a bit more precise so that when I come to sew it on the sewing machine, I know where I'm going. And you've got no bobbliness of the fabric. It's nice and crisp and you can sew nice and neatly. And I'm just going to do the other side. Only gently, you don't need to go mad with the iron. And the pins, as I said, you can iron over them, they're fabulous. I'm now going to bring this to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew down each side of this binding. So I've got it on a straight stitch on my sewing machine and I'm going to just sew along, and I'm going to sew as close to the edge of that binding as I feel comfortable with, or as you feel comfortable with. Because you've got a double fold on the binding, none of that fabric is going to pop out from underneath because it's double folded. So I'm going down one side, and then I'm going to go down the other side. And I haven't started right at the very beginning. I've just come down slightly. And I'm just sewing down the sides. And I'm taking my pins out as you go because you don't want to sew over your pins. You really don't, because that will muck your sewing machine up. So I'm going to just trim my threads, take those away so that I can do the next two sides of the square. And I've stitched this in contrast threads so that you can see it. Normally you would match your thread to your binding. So the next process you're going to do the top and the bottom. So exactly the same as before, except you've got a double piece of fabric in the corner. So I'm going to turn that over and fold that and finger press that in place. And then I'm just going to fold in the corner and press, so like a little bit of pizza wedge in that corner, and that will keep that little towel of fabric into your square when you sew it. So when I roll that over, I'm just going to pop a pin in that corner, and then I'm going to pop a pin in the middle, and on this corner I'm just going to turn this round, and I'm going to double turn this, put my little pizza wedge in that corner and turn it over. And look how lovely that is. And I'm going to do the other end as well. And then I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and stitch it. I've got a bit of thread there, so let's get rid of that. Turn that. So it's the same process on the big squares and the little squares. So this corner is turned under and pinned. And we'll do the middle, turn under and pin, and we're going to just turn that round, my little pizza wedge in the corner, turn over, and I'm going to sew these two edges up. So pop that under the machine and off we go again. And I did make sure I took my needle out in good time. My pin out in good time. You do not want to sew over your pins. I will sew down there. And I'm just using the pin to keep that end in place, and I'll move it out by the time I get there. Finish that end. And then we'll do the other side. I'll just go back a bit. Now I've got the sewing machine on a very slow speed as well because I don't like to sew too speedy, but you go at whatever speed that you'd like. Just a back tack. So now we've made one quilt. This made one. Woo! And this is another one I've made earlier. Now you can see where I've stitched this one with non-matching thread. It's a little bit rubbish, but it's the same sewing on this side And that's got a matching thread, and you really don't notice it. It's just because I've used a contrast thread on this side. Now, for the bag, you are going to need, I'm going to bring this over. For the bag, you are going to need 12 5-inch squares and 28 2.5-inch squares. Now for the top of the bag, I've used all the lovely charm fabrics for the Quilt-As-You-Go squares. But if I turn this on its bottom, you'll see that the underside is all in the backing. And I will show you how I've made that to make it more sturdy later on. But what you need to do is take 4 of your 5-inch squares and 4 of your 2.5-inch squares for each front panel. So the front and the back are the same with 2, 2 and 4 down the middle. Now I'm going to show you how to join these on the sewing machine with a zigzag stitch. So that's what I'm going to do next. So I put that aside and I've got my 2 panels. Now when I take this onto the sewing machine, we're just going to push those panels together, but not push tightly. They're just going to butt up to each other and they're just going to be stitched down. Now you can see on these two, one is slightly longer, just where the folding has been. This is fabric, it moves. You can ease it in and you can stretch it. And we're going to make those fit perfectly under the sewing machine. So don't panic when they're just a fraction out, because you can resolve that when stitching. So let me show you that under the sewing machine. So I've got a zigzag stitch on my sewing machine now, and I'm just going to pop that edge under, and I'm going to just show you, I'm just butting those up to each other. I'm not pushing them. And that zigzag stitch is going from each side of the binding to create, well, to put them together. And as you see, as I'm getting to the end, I'm just moving them together. Keep your fingers out of the way, and a back tack and pull that up. So they are joined. Now let me take you back to the bag. You can obviously see this zigzag on these 2 panels, but you can hardly see it on these panels. You won't notice it. When you use the same colour thread, it will look beautiful. So that's how you join them on the machine. So for your base of your bag, you want it to be a bit more stable. So what I have used is a heavyweight fusible interlining, and as you can see, it's quite thick. Now my top tip for this is, do not fuse this onto here, because if you fuse that onto there and it's out a little bit, you're going to have to start again, and that's a waste of fabric. So top tip, always fuse your interlining onto your 5-inch inner square, and then you can position it with your template to be perfect. And I have made the base up here, and the base consists of 2 5-inch squares and 2 2.5-inch squares, and I normally put the bindings in the bag so that this lovely smooth area will be your base. And as you can see, it's a bit more stable than the wadding squares. So now we're going to put our fancy zip in, and this is this, oh look how lovely it is. Look, you can see all the lovely cut out edges, because it's a fancy zip and it's so easy to do. And that goes all the way around the top here. So to do that, I have put 2 rows of 9 2.5-inch squares together. Now I have kept all the bindings equal along one edge, but you don't have to. You can put them all wiggledy-piggledy if you want. But with a fancy zip, this is amazing. You're not hiding the zipper tape. This goes on top of your panel like this. And I'll show you how to do it, because it's really super easy. So I'm going to turn over my fancy zip, and I'm going to turn over one of my panels. And you can see my fancy zip is longer than my panel, but that doesn't matter, because it's easier to put a longer zip in than it is an exact length zip. And what we need to do is take our trusty glue pen, because this is a lovely way to put a zip in. And what I do, I take the glue pen and I run it all along that edge of the zip. And then I'm going to position the band on top. Now, normally with teeth on the zip, you want the edge of the fabric to meet the edge of the teeth, but well, you'll see when I get to the sewing machine, I've got a nice gap between there, and I've just popped that panel on there, and I'm going to press that down with my fingers, and just while it dries, I'm going to pop a couple of pins in before I take it to the sewing machine, just to keep it in place in case that glue hasn't stuck yet. So there we go. So that's ready to take to my sewing machine. Now on my sewing machine, I have put a zipper foot on the machine still, because it will give that room for those zipper teeth to guide through the machine. But we're not running the stitch right up against those teeth. We don't need to do that with this. So let me take that to the machine and show you how we do this. I've gone back to a straight stitch. And first things first, actually, I'm going to just move the slider out of the way so I can start the stitching on the zip. And then I'm going to move that when I get to that point. So start at the beginning, and I'm going to sew quite close to the edge of the band. So let me get going. And again, I've got contrast thread. Let me get that out of the way. And I'm sewing quite close to the edge of the fabric. Now when I get close to the slider, I'm just going to raise my needle so it's still in the fabric, raise my presser foot and pull that slider out of the way. And as I come down, I'm going to get close to my first pin and I'm going to remove that. But can you see that glue has kept that in place? And we're just going to sew all the way down. And one of my favourite things about sewing is it doesn't have to be quick. You can go at your own pace and you'll get there when you get there. And we're nearly at the end. And I'm just guiding that through. And we're at the end. Done. Now, look at that. It's done. It's in there. And if I cut my threads, I will just run that. Look at that. It moves nicely. Done. It's easy, isn't it? And look how pretty it is. So now I'm going to put in the next side of the zip. So I'm going to turn this over again. Now with this side, you're going to need to line up the seams as well as you can. Don't be too panicked about it. But you want this end to match this end. So we're going to do exactly the same process. So I'm going to move that out of the way. I'm going to take my glue pen and I'm going to run that along the zip tape and get some glue there so that it gets stuck. And then I'm going to take this end and start lining that. Oh, see, it just works. And I've left that gap in between the two panels. So because this isn't a normal zip, this is a fancy zip, and this is all the Quilt-As-You-Go, you don't have a lining. So it's just a slightly different way of doing it. I'm just pressing that panel down. I'm going to pop a couple of pins in there so that it's in place, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine again. So again, this time, because my zipper foot is on this side, I'm going to start the other end. So I'll put that under the zipper foot and we get going again. And take my pin out as we go. That glue is holding the panel in place and it's super easy to stitch. And take that pin out. Right to the end. Now, because I got my slider head there, I can just about make it without pulling the slider head down. So I'm going to raise my needle, take that out. And look at that. So this is how easy the zip was to put in. And look, doesn't it look lovely? That fancy zip with all the cutouts is just beautiful. And it just, look at that. Whee! You can do it. Don't be scared of zips. Honestly, just don't be scared of them. Now, I need to show you how to do the ends and how to put your end panels on. I have one I have prepared earlier. So here it is. And I've done this in white so that you can see where I've stitched the zip. And when I turn it over, you can see the gap between the teeth. And you can see on this end, I have just tacked the ends of the zips over. And on this end, I have just pinned them. So I was going to show you how I just tack these ends down because we don't want to cut them off because that frays. And we want this to be a nice edge so that we can sew our end square on. So I've just taken a needle and thread, and you don't need to be very precise about this because this is inside your bag. All you need to remember is not to take that stitch through to this side. You don't want to see it on this side, but you just want to tack this zip down. And can you see, I'm not even doing little stitches. I'm doing big stitches. Really doesn't matter as long as you can't see them on the other side. So look at that. You don't have to be too precise. That's that side done. And I'm going to snip that off. I'm going to put a knot into the end of my thread so I can do the other side. So I'm going to start this way this time. And I just quickly, oh look, I didn't cut my tail of my thread off. I'll go and cut that off in the end. So I'm just running along there. And you're not going to see this. This is all going to be inside your bag. And it's just to keep those tags out of the way and to make this edge nice so that you can sew the end panel on. I'm going to snip that off there. Take my pin out. So we've got that end and that end. Now, when we come to join your 5-inch panel here, you're going to see, if I grab that panel, you're going to see, if I lined that up that end, this end is shy by quite a lot, about 1/4 of an inch. And that is the width of your teeth of your zip. So don't panic when you see this. So what I do is take my square and I fold it in half. So I've got the midpoint and I just finger press that so I know where the teeth have got to be. So I take the panel and I put one end there and I pop a pin in so that end meets. So that meets there, and I pop a pin in this end, and that end is level. Oh, not quite. So let's take that back out, and I'll pop a pin in there. And then we've got this excess here. You can see it doesn't quite line up. But what we're going to do, when we sew that, we're going to just ease that edge into this edge, and it's not going to notice. It's going to be absolutely fine, so don't panic when you get to this. I'm just going to add another couple of pins just so that I know how much fabric I've got to ease in as I go, just like that. And then I'm going to over sew this edge. Now I am going to do it in white thread. Now you would use same thread, but I'm using white thread so you can see how I over sew this together. And I've put a knot in the end of my thread, and I'm just going to pick up the very end of the bag, and I'm going to go over to the other side and pick that side up and create a loop over the top. So over sewing, you're going to over sew the two sections of fabric, and I've just run my needle through that loop and give that a pull just for added security. And for over sewing, you're just going to run your needle through both sides of the fabric and pull that through, and that is all you're going to do. That's how easy it is you're going to pull that through. And can you see I'm creating little stitches all the way along? It's really, and just pull the thread as you go. And as you get to the, you can just see with my thumb, I'm moving that fabric into place so that it will just ease into place. When you get to the zip, you're going to run your needle through both layers of fabric, and you're going to catch the zip as well. But when you get to the teeth, you obviously can't sew where the teeth are. So we get to the edge of the teeth. And I'm just going to pop a little knot in that end. I'm going to run the thread through one side to come up the other side of the teeth. And then I am going to carry on over sewing till the end. Got to the end, and I am just going to put a knot in there and run my thread through the fabric just to cut it off like that. Now take that pin out, and you can see my stitches. They don't look neat, but if I show you the other end, there's the side that I used matching thread, and you can't see it. And when I turn that over, that is joined into that zip like that. We finished our zip. Nice and easy. There's nothing to it, is there? Don't panic about zips. It's absolutely fine. But I'm going to pop these aside because I'm going on to the handles for you now. So let's just pop those aside. And you get the pattern for your handle. And what you're going to do is you're going to cut it. The pattern is on the fold. So when you fold, you have your fabric, you're going to cut that pattern so that the fold is down the bottom here. So then when you open it up, you get a whole big handle. Now you're going to cut it a pair in the backing fabric and a pair in a heavyweight sewing interlining. Now the reason I do a sewing interlining, it gives a nicer shape to the handle, and it's super easy to put in. Now normally you would tack it, but you know what? I tack it on the sewing machine. It's really easy. So all I'm going to do is put a couple of pins, and then I'm going to show you on my sewing machine. I do a really long stitch length. So the longest stitch length that your machine can do. On this one, it's a 5. So that's the longest it will do. And that will be like a sewing machine tacking. And all we want to do is tack this interlining to the bag handle. And so I'm going to sew right along close to that edge, because we've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance all around this handle. So you want it really scant. So you want about 1/8 away from the edge. So let me take that to the sewing machine. And I only do the 2 long edges because that's all you need to do. So, and I'm going quite quick because it's just tacking. We go down one edge like so. And then I just flip it round and do the other edge. And I'll show you when I've finished how close that is to the edge. There we go. And I'm going to take the pins out. And then that interlining is tacked to the handle. And I'm going to snip these threads here. And I'm going to change my sewing machine stitch length back down to about a 2.5 inch length. Because the next thing we're going to do is we are going to fold this handle in half, like this. And we're going to pop pins in at the end, and a pin in the middle, and a pin at the other end. And what I'm going to do, this is going to sound a bit weird, but I'm going to start stitching in the middle of the handles, about here, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance around these points and off here, and then I'm going to leave a gap here, and then stitch round this way. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I've dropped my needle into the fabric here, right on this point, and I'm going to lift my foot up and pivot so the needle stays in that corner so that you come down the fabric this way. And I'm going to do the same on this end point here. So needle in, 1/4 inch from the edge, lift your foot, pivot and turn. And then when we come, I've taken my pin out, very important. When I come down this way, I'm going to go to the edge of the fabric, and then I'm just going to back tack. There we go, done. Needle up and out. And then I'm going to turn this over and do the same, leaving a gap so I can turn the handle through. So I put that back under the machine and off we go. I've just got to be careful to take this pin out, because we don't want to sew over our pins. Down to this corner, needle in, foot up, down to the next point, needle in, foot up, along to the end, and back tack. Done. And oh, needle out of the machine. Take that out, like so, and take that pin out. What we have to do now is trim all these edges up. So the first thing I'm going to do is trim that edge of the point there. So snip that off. This will give you a really nice shape to your handle. Then I'm going to snip here. Don't snip your stitches, because if you snip your stitches, it will fray. If you do it by accident though, a top tip here is to go back in and just sew again, just slightly in from the other line, and that will secure it. So if you do it by mistake, all is not lost. Snip again, and I take the excess fabric away from that point, and I just trim it down. It will just give a nice neat shape to that point. And what you're going to do is to turn this point through. So we're going to push this through like so, and I've used my thumb and I'll pull the fabric through like this, and it's like creating a snake. I've got a pokey tool actually that will be better. I forgot about that, so I'll pop that in there, and I'm going to just pop that point through there, pop that point there, pop that point there, and then you've got that nice point on the handle. Then you do that for the other end. I've got one I made earlier, so here's one I've made it earlier, and we've got this gap here, and I'm going to give this a nice good press because you can see it's quite wrinkly. Where I've turned it through, it's quite wrinkly, and we don't want that. We want it all nice and flat, so I give that a press, And then what we're going to do, you don't have to worry about sewing this gap up because there's a little trick for that. What we're going to do is going to fold the handle in half like this. And I'm going to pop a couple of pins in because it's quite thick here. I'm going to pop that like that. And at this end, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure 1 inch from here to here, and I'm going to pop a pin in there so I know that's 1 inch, and I'm going to do the same on this end. So I'm going to fold that in half, and that gap there to there is 1 inch, and I'm going to pop a pin in there. I'll move my ruler away, and what I'm going to do is take this to the sewing machine and sew from that where I put that pin 1 inch. I'm going to top stitch all along this edge, and in doing that I will seal up this opening. So I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and do that. So I'm keeping it folded in half. It's thicker, so your machine might struggle a little bit, but this one is absolutely fine. And you're just going to top stitch all the way down that edge until you get to that final pin. And this gives you a really stunning bag handle. It gives you a handle that looks like a leather handle on a handbag. It's really fabulous. And I'm getting to that final pin. I don't want to sew on it. I take it out and I back tack. Voila, done. And that comes out, and I trim my threads. I'm not trimming them very well, but this will give you, look at how beautiful that handle is. Isn't that stunning? And you've got that nice soft interlining in there that makes it really sturdy. And when we join that onto the bag, it looks like a really lovely, like a leather handle that you get on a coach bag. So here's the other handle I prepared earlier, and I've actually stitched it onto the bag panel, but don't panic, I'm going to show you exactly what you got to do for this. But I wanted to show you, this is the handle I've just stitched, and it's got the contrast stitching so that you can see it. It's not even 1/8 of an inch away, it's a top stitch, so it's as close as you can get to the edge without going over. But don't panic. If your sewing isn't as good or you're not as confident, just go in a little bit more. It won't matter. It really won't matter. Have it, if you need it 1/4 of an inch, you do it 1/4 of an inch. Don't be scared, okay? But I do it a scant 1/8 of an inch. So this is the one I've prepared earlier. And this is my front panel or my back panel, because you'll need 2 of these. I'm only going to do one, but obviously you need a pair of handles and you need a pair of fronts and backs. So this is my 4 5 squares and my 4 2.5 inch squares put together. Now, to get your measurement for your handle, I'm going to take a ruler, and you see this seam line where the 2.5 inch meets the 5 inch, this join here. I'm placing the 1 inch line along there. I want my handle 1 inch away from that line. So I'm going to take my handle and I'm opening up that pointed section, and I'm placing that. So I've put about 1/2 inch down from the edge, as long as it matches the other side. So you do your first one and then make the other one match. But it's about 1/2 inch down from that edge where that point meets. And I'm going to pop a pin in there because it's quite springy because we've sewn it in half. And pop a pin in. And then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine. But I'm not completely sewing this handle on because we need this handle out of the way so we can insert the zip. So I'm only going to sew down this on this point here, like I've done on this point here, and I'm going to just back tack here or back stitch here and at that end, but not sew it completely onto my bag yet. We'll come back to that. So let me stitch this for you and get rid of my pins. I'll put my needle in and off we go. I'm watching out for that pin. I'm going to take that out and I'm keeping that handle in place, and I'm back stitching or back tacking, coming down, and I'm going to sew to that point, leave the needle in the machine, raise my presser foot, turn and come back the other side. And again, I'm doing this in contrast stitching so that you can see what I'm doing. So it'll look a bit of a mess, but it won't when you do matching thread. Let's take that out. Let's snip those threads so you can see what I've done. So here's the one I've done in coordinating thread, you can't see it, and this is the one I've done in the contrast thread. So that's this panel done. Now we're going to do the zip. So this is my zip panel that we've just made, and we've got to join one of the front panels to the zip panel and the back panel on the other side. Now I'm only going to show you one side, but obviously you would need to attach both, but I'm going to show you how that's done. So you need to put this panel in the middle. Let's move my pins out of the way. You need to attach this panel into the middle of your zip panel, and you can see this seam matches this seam here, so that is 5 of the 2.5 inches, and 2 of those 2.5 inch squares will go down the side of the bag, and you've got 2 this end and you've got the 2 5 inches. So dead center you want to place this panel with your zipper panel. Now I've changed my machine to a zigzag stitch, the same as before, and I'm going to take this and join this seam along here. So let's take that there. When you're moving it to your machine, make sure you've still got that in the right place, otherwise you'll have a very squiffy bag, a very squiffy bag, and we don't want that. So I'm going to start with the zigzag, and again the panels are just kissing. I'm just laying them so that they're kissing. You don't want to squidge them. And when you get to the end of the 5 inch, that should meet your seam where your 2.5 inch ones come together. So you haven't got any guide in the middle of this, but when you come to the end of your 5 inch, those seams should match. So I'll show you as I go along. And as I said, sewing is a pleasure, it's not a race. Take your time, don't feel that you have to speed at anything. And you can see I've matched that seam across there. Now I've got another one I can match here, so you're going to keep making sure they match. And I'm going to carry on to the end. And I get to the end and I just do a back tack or back stitch, take the needle out, and then that's your front panel joined. Again, I've done it in contrast so that you can see it, but when you do it in your matching thread, it will look wonderful. Now before I press this is where we're going to go and finish the bag handle. So I'm going to convert my sew match machine back to a straight stitch. I can find it, there we go, and we're going to fold these handles back, and what we want to do is stitch round here like so that that handle is in place. So I'm just going to pop a pin in to help me keep that flat, and I'll pop a pin in the other one because I will do both in the contrast for you. And I'm going to sew again a top stitch around that section. It'll be easier when I've done it. You can actually see where I've sewn then. I'm going to fold up my sides of my bags, pop my machine, put that under the machine, start sewing a back tack, and then I'm going up just before that seam where those squares join, and I'm going to pop my needle down, press the foot up, turn, and come along where that seam would be underneath. Pop my needle into the handle, turn, oops, and down, and back tack. Now the reason you should back tack or back stitch here is it is a handle, so it does need some security. You don't want your handles falling off your bag, do you? So, and then I'm going to go along to this one. Let's just snip that so I can turn it. And we'll go do exactly the same on this side. So a few stitches, back tack, and then come along again, needle in, turn the bag, and then we're sewing straight across here. Mind your needle, needle in, and down the other side. And you meet your other stitching and a back tack to secure. That's it. And we'll take that out. And I've got threads everywhere. And I'm going to take that pin out. But can you see, we've now, let's take those off so it's clearer. Those handles are nice and secure there. They look, well, they don't look lovely because it's in contrast stitching. But when you do it in normal thread, it will look wonderful. And all we're then going to do is take this to the sewing machine and press this seam so in half. So you've got your zipper on one side, your front on the other, and we're going to give that a good press to give that a nice sharp definition of that seam. There we go. So you can start to see the bag coming together like so. So that's the top of the bag and that's the side of your bag. So the next step is to join your base. So we've put this panel on and we've pressed this ready to become a super duper bag, and we're going to put the other panel onto this side in exactly the same way and attach the handle exactly the same way as I've done this. So you're going to have double this length here because you've got another one here. I haven't done that. I'm going on to show you how to do the base. And that's exactly the same process as joining the zipper in. So we're going to zigzag this seam. We're going to put these together. The only difference is the base is solid. There's no movement. It's nice and thick and solid. This side has got the wadding in. It's a bit more flexible. So we're just going to be patient when we join this, because as you can see, when I put this end together, oh, they kiss nicely. But look at this end, they're nowhere near. So when we're sewing, we're just going to have to push those and not push them, just make sure that they're kissing. But it's because of the fabric differences, it gives you a slight different movement. So let me take you to the sewing machine and show you how it's done. So we'll pop that under there and we'll start, and I'm back tacking because this is your bag now and you don't want it to fall apart. So back tack or would help if I changed it to zigzag stitch. So I'll take my needle out and I'll turn my machine back to zigzag and I'll start back at the beginning. See, we all make mistakes, doesn't matter. So there we go, zigzag here and then a bit of back tacking to secure that seam, and then we're going along. So there is a slight difference because of the fabric, still just kissing. Don't squidge them. There we go. And I'm joining up, I'm matching the seams as we get to where the 5 inches turn into 2.5 inches. And we go down, and you will see when I will stop at this seam, can you see there is a gap between these two where this is thick and this is soft. So all we're going to do is just, see how easy that is? Just move those together so they are kissing. And look how easy that is. And go to the end, and we're going to do a bit of back tacking again. There we go. Needle out, foot up, trim threads. Now, when we've got the other side on, you're going to fold that over, and you're going to create a tube and just join that. Now, you've got lots of area that you can get that under your sewing machine, so don't panic, it will be totally fine. But when you've done the other side as well, just trim those threads, take that back to the iron, and you want to press this base so we've got a nice crisp line on the base. So I'm going to do that. It's getting exciting. We've nearly got a bag. And what are you going to do with your bag? Fantastic. I can't wait to see all of them. So can you see we're starting to form the bag? So I'm going to show you how to do this, attach the sides on next. So now we have got to attach the bottom of the sides to the bottom of the base. Now we're going to do that with zigzag stitch again. And it's just a little bit more complicated because there's more going on. It's becoming to feel like a bag, but we can still get that under the sewing machine. So I'm going to do this with zigzag like I did the other one. So bear with, and we're going to do both sides so that you can see how it goes. So we're going to have to fold a bit, and I'm matching those squares up at the end, and we're going to zigzag and back tack, back stitch, and we're going to come along, and this matches here, so we're kissing again and not squishing. And you can see I'm just easing this square in slightly because this is the softer side and the base is the firm side, and there's just a little bit, the side panel is just a smidge longer, so I've just eased that in as I've gone. Get to the end, back tack, needle out, and I'll just trim those threads. Oh, it's gonna become a bag soon. And then we're going to join this side here. So I'm going to do it this way so that you can see when you've got all the bag in place. And you know what? I'm going to actually open the zip for this just to give a little bit more movement. So there we go. I'm going to pop that side. And I'm going to place this under and match that seam and pop my foot down, and I'm going to start stitching, back tack. Now that's secured the beginning, it's easier to move your bag. So can you see I'm just moving that out of the way, and I'm going to stop and make sure those match, and you can see I've got a little bit of easing to go in there. And that is purely because the base is thicker than the side panel. Oh, I've mucked that up a little bit. I think we get away with that. Yeah. Bit of back tacking, needle out and out. Now this is tricky trying to get it out the sewing machine because it's a great big loop now. This is a bag. And I've done that side. Let's trim those threads. So it's starting to look like a bag. We need to press these seams to give it a nice square shape. So I'll do that, and then I'll show you how to join the side seams. So I've got my bag turned inside out because we've got to sew up these side seams. So I'm going to take a couple of pins again. I've taken too many, but I'm going to join those seams there. So I've got that matched up. I've got a knot in my thread and I'm just going to start at this end and I am going to start over sewing again. And we're going to over sew the whole length of each of these 4 side seams. So this is the inside of my finished bag and you can see I've over sewn that and I've used coordinating thread for this. Doesn't it look lovely? And I just sat in front of the TV and I did it and it was just nice to chill, do a bit of hand sewing, done. So I've done all 4 sides of this. Now I'm going to flip it the other through so that it's the right side out because we're going to poke out these corners as well. So I'm going to grab its bottom, pull it through. Well, oh look how pretty is this fabric. You're going to have to get some of this, I tell you, it's gorgeous. So now look, these points are pointed in. I'm going to pop my finger in there and just give that corner good poke out so that it looks all nice and square. And I'm going to do it the same up here on the zip, like this, and on the other side, like so. And look at this fancy zip. Oh, now this hasn't got stuffing in, so you can put all your goodies in. Isn't this just adorable? I'd really like to see what you do with your bags and what fabrics you use, and I hope you have so much fun with this. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi everybody, it's Jenny from the Missouri Star Quilt Company. We hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you aren't already part of the Missouri Star Quilt Company family, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss a thing. And if you click that bell, it'll notify you every time a new tutorial comes out.